innovate, enable.
This week on The Winning Leap, we tackle the issue of economic crime in India and how we can gear up to fight this fast-growing offence. Now, if we want to find sustainable solutions, we need to educate ourselves on the problem. So let's take a look at the situation as it stands today. In today's world of connectivity, nobody is immune to economic crime. A 2014 survey shows that more than 1 in 3 organizations around the world are impacted by economic crime. From financial fraud, IP infringement and corruption to cybercrime, economic crime continues to be a major concern for organizations of all sizes, across all regions and in virtually every sector.
Typically, what we call as black money, and which is a huge parallel economy, would comprise of two different sets of incomes which have not been disclosed. So you could have income from a legitimate source but which has not been disclosed either at the time of its generation or when you get possession of that income. That's one. The second kind would be income which is from illegitimate activities, which could be racketeering, drugs, syndicates that are run, where you blackmail people, or it could be just terrorism, counterfeiting.
From the infrastructure and construction sector to aviation, oil and gas, real estate and telecom to retail and consumer markets, most sectors in India are particularly prone to threats of bribery and corruption.
If you really look at it from a point of view of regulatory environment, the regulatory environment has created its own challenges for the companies in India. Rightly so, I am all for it. So whether it is a company's bill, it has shifted the onus of accountability to a great extent on the independent directors as well as on the auditors. If you also look at it in terms of the companies themselves, as they operate in a globalized environment, they are obliged to adhere to the global ways of doing business, i.e. a much higher level of transparency, adherence to global anti-corruption laws like the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act or the UK Bribery Act.
The shift in wealth from developed economies in the West to high-growth emerging economies in the South and the East is being seen as a significant factor leading to corruption across the world. I'm here at AZB and Partners with Zia Modi, who's an expert on security law and who's going to explain the problem as it stands today. Zia, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So let's start with the basic question. Now, it's fairly pertinent news that black money is a large problem in India. We hear about it all the time. The government is taking steps to kind of fix this issue as well. Can you explain to us in a nutshell the problem as it stands today?
Black money is money that is not subject to tax and not subject to scrutiny. So the first thing is what has been more in the news, which is the foreign black money problem. Which stems from the government's perception that there is a large amount of money which has fled from India over decades and which needs to come back home in one form or the other. So that's the foreign money. And of course that's more topical because it has always received more headline news. I personally think that the larger problem is back home, domestic unaccounted money. Which seems to continue to escape the tax net. And I think that the larger struggle, if you like, for the government is going to be how to really get that catharsis going.
Can you tell us a little bit about the changes that are taking place on a legislative level to combat this problem in India?
So first you have obviously the fact that there's an act out there called the Prevention of Money Laundering Act, which has severe consequences. And Hawala money, if you like, would be caught in that. The Foreign Assets Act now is of course designed to make sure that if you now, as a resident, misdeclare your income tax return, do not declare your foreign assets, then as the Finance Minister and Mr. Sinha have been saying, there's going to be hell to pay. So there is a fear factor which is creeping into the system, which is a good thing. There has to be a catharsis at some stage. If we have to cross the line to a developed country surely this element has to substantially decrease.
As your previous comments, that the real issue is tackling the problem of black money in India, not so much so internationally. Can you talk to us a little bit about this, and what are your views on this?
You see, the reason why it is more difficult, I think, just logistically, is because, as I was saying, it's difficult to move money in bank accounts abroad now. Whereas here, it is still just physical. You've got your regular angarya, you've got other forms of movement. And so, when you're in the same territorial space, the suitcases move around more quickly, if you like. And so, I think the entrapment ability of the government, it's much more difficult for them. So unless they've got a tip-off or they've got you red-handed, or it's hard for them.
All right, let's talk a little bit about some statistics. Now, as per the Corruption Perception Index of 2014, India ranks 85th out of 174 countries with a score of 38. And currently, India is ranked 142nd out of 189 countries when it comes to ease of doing business. So can you tell us what are some of the factors that are contributing to these low rankings?
Well, I think that what is contributing to the low rankings in the corruption index is the corruption. So it's obvious that it is systemic. I personally believe that it is far more systemic at the lower levels. Why it feeds in to the ease of doing business level is because obviously if at every corner there is a perception that you will have to dirty yourself and things just don't move, then obviously the perception of ease of doing business is so sorry, there is no ease of doing business.
And finally, in your opinion, are the legal consequences for perpetrators of economic crimes, are they proportionate or maybe a bit too lenient? And are there any changes in the checks and balances in the legal system that are to be made?
Theoretically, there's prosecution. There's 100% penalty. There is hell to pay under the Income Tax Act. If you've got foreign accounts abroad, you've got FEMA and the Enforcement Directorate who can crawl all over you in addition to the PMLA. Is the enforcement scary enough for people to say, I don't need this? My own view is that more people than before are actually saying, I don't need this brain damage, which is very good. So I think more naming and shaming, more of a practical approach if people come forward. I think that strong enforcement mechanisms which by way of conversation make others in the ecosystem say, oh my God, this happened to him or her, I don't want it happening to me. So it's not an overnight process.
Well, thank you, Zia, so much for being on the show.
Thank you.
It's time for a short break, but don't go anywhere, because when we come back, we explore Winning Leap solutions to the problem of economic crime. Stay tuned. Welcome back to the Winning Leap. Now, in the last segment, we gave you a holistic view on the problem of economic crime in India. But it's now time to be proactive and seek out sustainable solutions. So let's see if we can find the answers to these challenges. While there have been strides taken by the government to combat economic crimes, such as the Companies Act of 2013, which deals with protecting against corruption, it would be beneficial for us to look at global best practices to fight the problem of economic crime.
You have laws on privacy, counterfeiting. How many of them are effectively implemented? You go ask the music industry, the software industry, they're crying. They cannot be research and development, they cannot be growth because of the counterfeiting. Why isn't that stopping? So I think the problem is not more legislation, the problem is actually to implement. How many convictions do you get at the end of the day on corruption and bribery or counterfeiting? The records are dismal.
Singapore is well known for its stance on corruption and has taken strict measures to guarantee the eradication of its corrupt past. For a country like Singapore that was mired in corruption, to come out of it and excel in eradicating it means there is hope for India. And I'm here with Ashutosh Mishra, Executive Director, Transparency International India, who's going to talk to us about the Singapore anti-corruption model and how we can begin to deploy some of the policies right here in India. Welcome to the show, Ashutosh.
Thank you.
Let's look at Singapore as an example. Singapore has consistently ranked amongst the top 10 corruptionless countries in the world. Now, of course, this is no small task and it can't be done without political support. So what is the role that the government has played in really abolishing corruption to such a big extent in Singapore?
See, coming to the Singapore, if you have to go back into history, let's say 1960s, I mean, the government was very serious about the corruption issues and they got a support from the masses as well. And then the corruption, I mean, they came out with the Prevention of Corruption Act. We do have an act like in India, but the act has been revised regularly according to the needs of the hour, and then their anti-corruption agency is quite effective in terms of directly reports to the PMO. There is no political interference, there is incentives for whistleblowing, there are laws which are protecting whistleblowers, and then of course the political will, the commitment is there.
You know, this is such a great task and it absolutely cannot be done without an effective corruption control framework. So can you talk to us a little bit about the framework for corruption control in Singapore?
The first step should be, of course, the political will. Then second is drafting of the certain laws, anti-corruption laws, which was done in Singapore in late 50s and then early 60s. The Prevention Corruption Act, and there is always a provision for amendments, modifications, and third is the anti-corruption agencies. Okay, they have been established in the year 1958 or 59, and then they came out with certain institutional arrangements like training to the officials, focus on incentives. Then of course the reforms in the civil services, which is missing in India. I mean, where there is an incentive for being honest, rotation of the officers at the sensitive positions. There is a law in the Singapore, way back in 1980s, which talks about corruption in private sector. So there is a seriousness on the part of a government, which is missing in India.
Yes, absolutely. Let's also talk about the judicial aspect of it. What are some of the checks and balances afforded by the judiciary to perpetrators of corruption?
What we can say, it's a bit different because the political class or the ruling political party is more committed to the anti-corruption aspect, and that is also affecting the judiciary. So time-bound resolution of cases are there. More focus on training on prosecution aspect also. So people are great. Somebody who has a good knowledge of the subject is willing to join the services rather than joining a private sector. So in the longer run, it's affecting the rate of prosecution or the rate of solving the crime, especially financial crime in Singapore. That has really helped the country a lot.
Alright, and finally, India being such a vast country, in your opinion, is it viable that we can adopt some of the best practices from Singapore right here in India?
Of course, we can. Most important is the reforming the civil services. There should be accountability. Our civil services, that's what I feel, are not accessible or not accountable also. Then bringing private sector. After 1991, there has been rapid privatization in India. There is no law to deal with the supply side of corruption. No Prevention of Corruption Act only deals with the demand side of corruption. And if you can recall, last UPA government, they introduced a lot of anti-corruption bills. Some of them lapsed. So it's a high time for a government to introduce a number of bills, new acts to deal with the private side of corruption. Then of course the focus on training part.
So the government has recently introduced this black money bill, but it seems like there's a lot more that can be done given the size of the problem that really exists in India. What are your thoughts on this?
You need to have, let's say, a long-term strategy. Now government came out with a black money bill, but what about the anti-corruption bills which have been pending? What about the public procurement bill? What about the beneficial ownership? There are a number of shadow companies which are being running here, and we exactly don't know who is the owner. Third, of course, the whistleblower protection. Fourth, of course, I'm talking about the private sector corruption. No, we don't have any law. We have ratified United Nations Convention Against Corruption, but there is no mechanism for asset recovery of the corrupt officials or the corrupt politicians.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Ashutosh. It's been a pleasure to have you on the show. Well, on that note, it's time for a short break. But don't go anywhere, because when we return, we help you understand the ever-changing face of fraud in India. Stay tuned. Welcome back to the Winning Leap. In modern society, technology and infrastructure are constantly evolving. So it's no surprise that the profile of a criminal is gradually changing too, becoming more sophisticated, more tech-savvy, and leaning more and more towards cybercrime. With the exponential growth in structured and unstructured data and proliferation of social media, there has been a steady increase in technology-driven frauds.
Cybercrime is here to stay and is on the rise. The way I look at cybercrime, earlier crime used to happen by using traditional or non-technology methods. Today, a lot of the same crime is being executed by using technology, and we've called it cybercrime. At the end of the day, the objective and the motive in economic crime is to make money. So if you use technology, the help of technology, we call it a cybercrime. So how you deal with that? I think so as companies or individuals, there are certain basic do's and don'ts we need to do. So for example, have complex passwords. Don't go around sharing your passwords with people. These are simple things, but people do mistake. I've done a lot of investigations around that.
Social media and the online revolution has opened up an opportunity for cyber criminals as perpetrators of economic crime.
The entire profile of the fraudster is changing. He is somebody who is much younger. He is in the age gap between 25 to 35 years. He is very smart. He is very articulate. He is technologically savvy. He understands what are the weak points in a company. He is an extrovert. He is somebody who is not going to operate alone. And finally, he is somebody who will first commit very insignificant frauds and see if he can get away. And if he does, that's when he's going to commit the real crime.
To get a clearer picture of the face of cybercrime in India, I'm here with Mr. Sivarama Krishnan, who is the leader, Cybersecurity, PwC India. Welcome, Mr. Krishnan.
Thank you.
Can you tell us a little bit about the profile of a cyber criminal today? What can we expect to see?
Historically, in the past, most of the cyber crimes has been done by IT professionals or the technologists who had a deep understanding about technology. But in the social media era, it has changed. Today, you have all category of people is able to carry out cyber crime. It is from uneducated to educated. It is from underage to the older aged people. It is from IT professionals to the regular professionals. It is pervasive across.
Well, actually, that brings me to the next question, specifically about social media. Do you feel that the widespread use of social media in this country actually adds to the favorable environment for cybercrime to take place?
Absolutely. People look for individual personal information for exploitation. Knowingly or unknowingly, social media exposes us to disclose them. For instance, if you use a credit card, what is the information the credit card user companies uses you to protect your information? Date of birth, place of residence, wife's name, daughter's name, mother's name, places that you visited last, and so on and so forth. And we are all encouraged to publish on daily basis our own personal data into the social media, which is accessible by the public. So in real essence, the social media is one of the stimulant for increasing cybercrime across the globe, not limited to India alone.
So, sir, can you tell us why do you think it is that in the recent years there's been such an increase in technology-driven fraud?
It's directly proportional to the increasing use of technology. Let's take a step back and think about it. Until few years back, the number of internet users limited to about 21 crores. Today, we have over 60 crores internet users in India, and all of them start using mobile phones. Second reason is, as we progress into use of it, and they've also learned in a normal crime scenario, the speed at which you get prosecuted or convicted is reasonably certain. In a cyberspace, it's evolving. It's a learning. So there is a delay in first catching a fraudster and then prosecuting them, and then they get punished.
So what can we do then, both on a corporate and an individual level, to try to protect ourselves from these crimes?
There are multiple strategies. For instance, a Facebook today offers you to protect what you're sharing. You want to share only with the friends or with the public.
Right, yeah.
And by default, we share everything with the public. If you're able to change that, that's one important thing which is needed. it is important for us to celebrate our successes, celebrate our vacations and so on and so forth. But it's also important that how do I do it? If I go out and do it to say that I'm going to be away for 15 days, you're inviting a thief to get into your home.
That's true.
When I look at from a corporate world, unfortunately, most of the most sensitive information of the corporates, which are intelligence driven for their business progress and performances, it is in their email boxes, it is in the form of Excel sheets, it's in the form of PowerPoints, it's in the form of Word documents.
Yeah.
So the question for the corporates is that how do I identify unstructured information which are crucial or which are relevant to protect in the corporates, and how do they protect them?
Right. And are there any steps being taken by the government actually to protect individuals and corporates from cybercrime?
The government has done multiple things. One, it has in their new IT Act, which they revamped in 2010, brought in clauses to protect corporate sensitive information, has provided the guidelines and the passage to ensure that it is prosecutable under the IT Act. Right. Now it is impendent upon the companies, how do they use it? How do they make sure that they have relevant prosecutable evidences collected and demonstrated to the prosecuting agencies? Every district has got a cybercrime cell. Now it is for us to really use them and make it stronger, stringent, and set an examples for people not to do it repeat again.
Thank you very much for joining us, Mr. Krishnan. Well, on that note, that's all we have for you this week. But do join us again next week on The Winning Leap as we focus on a very relevant topic of leveraging technology for growth. From the entire team, many thanks for watching.